This is the Late Round Podcast with your host, JJ Zacharisa.
What's up, everyone? It's JJ Zacharisa, the editor-in-chief at FanDuel and at NumberFire.com, and this is episode 392 of the Late Round Podcast, one of the many shows that are part of the FanDuel Podcast Network. Thanks for tuning in. There's a lot of uncertainty right now surrounding the football season. We don't know exactly when things are going to start for the NFL. We don't know exactly what it's going to look like when players inevitably get the coronavirus. There's just lots of uncertainty, and it's making fantasy managers feel uneasy. Now, please understand that I'm not downplaying what's going on across the country and across the world because I'm focusing on football. It's horrible. This pandemic is bad. This just happens to be a fantasy football show, so I'm going to talk about the pandemic's impact on fantasy football. Listeners seem to want me to talk about that this week too. I got a ton of coronavirus-related questions, starting with this email that says, "Hi JJ, big fan of your show and hope you and your family are staying safe. Thanks, same to you. My question is in regards to how fantasy commissioners should deal with the uncertainty of a pandemic season. What are some ways to mitigate the risks of players testing positive and being out for weeks at a time? The first two thoughts that came to me were more IR spots and allowing late swaps in lineups due to the report suggesting that players can be inactivated very shortly before kickoff. I'd be really curious to hear your strategies. Best, Chris." So first off, regarding the players being inactive shortly before kickoff, I think that's something that you need to ensure that your league mates know and understand going into the season. They need to be aware that things can change very quickly. If you're running a league with some people who may not be as hardcore as a lot of you listening to this podcast are, then maybe you can introduce some sort of rule that allows each team every week to replace their lowest score in their lineup. You run into some other issues in doing that, but at least that's one solution. But I think adding an additional IR spot or two makes sense, since we're bound to see more players listed as out. It'd be great if those IR spots don't have to be used, because that means that the spread is controlled, but it's better to err on the side of it's pretty likely that players are going to get this virus. You can also go with deeper rosters to allow for more depth and for handcuffs. Now, on top of the commissioner question, I got one from @CFGamebreaker that said, "Are you factoring coronavirus into your decision-making at all? For example, maybe thinking it will take some rookies longer to get integrated into their offenses, or bumping up handcuffs as players may be missing games for testing positive on top of the usual injuries." I think both of those points are very valid. We might worry a little bit more about rookies because of their lack of reps, and coaches deciding to play a safer choice in a veteran. And then I do think that handcuffs become a little bit more valuable in this scenario since the odds that a player misses time increases. And we know backup running backs are going to be more capable of seeing volume than wide receivers in that scenario. Even though the fantasy community tends to overvalue and overstate the impact of running back handcuffs, this year is definitely different. But I'll also say, keep in mind that handcuffing is a floor play and not a ceiling play. If you really want to go for a high ceiling lineup, you should draft handcuffs for running backs not on your roster. Like if you don't get Kenyon Drake, you can still get Chase Edmonds. That's a high ceiling play. But regarding rookies, you can't ignore what the market is also doing here. I say it all the time, but player evaluation isn't just looking at the individual player and saying, I want this guy or I don't want this guy. Everything is related to where that player is being drafted. So if the masses end up fading rookies, especially rookie running backs where the transition to the NFL is a lot easier, then I'll capitalize on those cheaper costs. I do think that we should be somewhat concerned about the lack of reps, but I also think it's really easy for us to overstate what that all means. So I don't think this is as simple as saying fade all rookies, especially if we're recognizing that players may get the virus, which would allow those rookies to then see the field. They may see the field more because of the coronavirus. So those are my general thoughts on the current state of the league. There's going to be inconsistency this year. It's going to be a season unlike any other. But at least we hopefully, and I stress the word hopefully, at least we'll hopefully be able to enjoy a fantasy football season. Now, before getting into the other questions this week, I want to let you guys know that with the return of baseball on July 23rd, FanDuel is celebrating with a special $1 million contest. Enter the $1 million MLB Opening Day Special and compete for your share of the $1 million prize pool, including a chance to bring home the $100,000 first place prize. Take your pick of Yankees, Nationals, Dodgers, and Giants and follow along using FanDuel's live scoring as the games unfold to see how your lineups are performing. Someone is going to end the night $100,000 richer. Don't miss out on the chance for that someone to be you. For more details, visit FanDuel.com or download the FanDuel app today. Eligibility restrictions apply. The first question this week, or the next question, I don't know what we would call it, but it's from @MRColton3. How do you modify rankings based on league size and roster spots? I'm in a 10-team league that starts only one quarterback, 2 running backs, 2 wide receivers, 1 tight end, 1 kicker, and 1 defense. With no flex and only 10 teams, do you take a onesie spot like tight end early or still stock up on running backs and wide receivers? Yeah, I mean, you've always got to be cognizant of the demand for each position when you enter a draft. With this league, you're starting fewer running backs and wide receivers because there's no flex, and you only need 2 of each. Not only that, but it's a 10-team league. It's a smaller league. And in a smaller league, you're going to need to have more of a perfect lineup. That means an earlier round tight end approach makes a little bit more sense. Because think about it. If you're in a 16-team league, you may say, well, that means if I get George Kittle or Travis Kelce, I'm going to have an even bigger advantage at tight end. That's not wrong, but at what cost? Because when you add teams to a league that starts, let's say, 2 running backs, 3 wide receivers, and a flex, each of those new teams are starting that many players too, that many more wide receivers and running backs. So it actually makes those positions even more important. Overall, though, in a 10-teamer with just 2 running backs and 2 wide receivers started, I would definitely try to get Kittle or Kelce. You should be able to still get a really good running back in that scenario too. This next question is from @AdjustRanking0. Who is the next best receiving option behind Adam Thielen in Minnesota? So first off, I really like Adam Thielen this year given where he's being drafted. And I feel like I need to let people know that. Thielen is definitely a target for me. But I think the answer to this question is Justin Jefferson. He's likely going to start right away and should be the number 2 on that team in targets by season's end. Dalvin Cook has a shot, but Jefferson is easily the second best talent at wide receiver on that roster, and it's not close. But don't forget about my boy Irv Smith either. On the tight end breakout show that I did a few weeks back, Irv was one of the players who really fit the criteria for spotting a breakout tight end really well. I'm very into Irv as a dart throw in redraft leagues this year, and I think that he's a really good buy in Dynasty. So in order, I'd say Justin Jefferson, Dalvin Cook, and Irv Smith in terms of who would be the number 2 player in targets on that Vikings team this year. That's how things project at least. But I like Irv a lot as a target later in your drafts. This next question is from @BrinleyMichael. Why is Melvin Gordon being drafted so high and Phillip Lindsay so low? Lindsay has back-to-back 1,000-yard seasons. If Gordon was back in LA, the gap between him and Eckler wouldn't be so drastic, right? Well, I don't think that we should be comparing Eckler to Lindsay because they're completely different running backs. The reason Eckler is valuable is because of his pass-catching ability. He's locked into a pretty high target share with the Chargers. The complete opposite is true with Phillip Lindsay. We watched his target share per game rate last year go from 13.4% during the first half of the season to 6.8% during the second half. And Melvin Gordon is a very capable pass catcher, so it only makes sense for him to take on that role, and we should probably expect Gordon to be the goal line back as well. Pat Shurmur is also the offensive coordinator in Denver now, and we've seen some spiked seasons from running backs in that Shurmur offense. I don't think that we should compare Melvin Gordon to Dalvin Cook or Saquon Barkley. Personnel often drives coordinator data. But at least we know that type of workload has happened under his lead. But I'm not advocating that you draft Melvin Gordon necessarily. He's not really a target of mine given his cost. And I'm also not saying that Lindsay is valued properly. I do think that the gap should at least be a little bit closer than it currently is. I'm just noting that this is not an Eckler-Gordon situation. Gordon has a lot more upside than Lindsay seems to have, because he's going to likely walk into seeing goal line work and a lot more receiving work. Phillip Lindsay's pass protection isn't good, and that's a concern. So to me, Lindsay's someone that you'll likely not be playing a whole lot in your lineup unless an injury happens to Melvin Gordon. If you're in a deeper league, Lindsay makes a little bit more sense as a deeper flex, but that's generally how I'm viewing this situation. This next question is from @Jake_Chesser. Do you ever sacrifice process for diversification across leagues? I have the 2 spot in multiple PPR Superflex leagues. Barkley is my clear number 2, but a part of me doesn't want to put all my eggs in one basket. So I wouldn't say it's sacrificing process. It's recognizing variance and that I'm and you're going to be wrong on players. So I do generally diversify, but not at the cost of being suboptimal. I think you can make the case for other players in that 102 spot, like Ezekiel Elliott. So I would at least consider that. But also, I'd need to know how many leagues you're playing in here. If it's like 3 or 4 leagues, I don't think it's that big of a deal to get Barkley in 2 of them. If it's 20 leagues, getting Barkley in 17 of them, that's a tough sell. Just don't be totally suboptimal. But yes, diversification is not a bad thing. The next question is from @birds_the_words. Who would you rather have in a dynasty league? Courtland Sutton or Kenny Golladay? So one of the things that I love about Kenny Golladay is that there's plenty of room for him to just take his fantasy football game to the next level. His contested catch ability is off the charts, and he was able to score 11 touchdowns last year, largely because the Lions love targeting him in the end zone. According to PFF, he was 3rd in the NFL last year in end zone targets. But Golladay did what he did last year in particular on just 116 targets. He had a 21.3% target share, so there's room to grow there. With Courtland Sutton, I think he's really, really good. But there's less of that growth potential analytically. You've got a whole bunch of weapons entering that offense, and Sutton had a 26% target share last year. That's likely going to be closer to his ceiling from a target share standpoint moving forward. And then you have to factor in quarterback play, which could go in his favor, but right now you have to give the nod to Matthew Stafford. The one area that favors Courtland Sutton is age. He's 2 years younger than Golladay, but I think largely in 3-year terms in Dynasty. And I also think that there's a higher likelihood that we see Sutton drop statistically than Golladay over the next year, given the changes in that offense. That makes Sutton a riskier bet despite that age advantage. So I'm going Golladay here. This next question is from @example0. Why are analysts so high on Terry McLaurin? Not denying his ability, just don't see the path to touchdowns. Certainly has a floor, but don't see the ceiling for him playing on a bottom 5 offense. If you're talking like 12 or 13 touchdowns, sure, I would agree with you. If you're talking 7 to 10 touchdowns, I don't know why he couldn't get there. Because he did get there last year. He scored 7 touchdowns in an offense that had the worst net yards per attempt rate in the league. And it was in an offense that ran the second fewest plays that we have seen from any team since 2011. Meanwhile, his opportunity adjusted touchdown marker, OTD, which is a metric created by ESPN's Mike Clay, it pegged McLaurin for 5.2 touchdowns. So he overachieved there, and his yards to touchdowns conversion basically says the exact same thing. It showed that he should have had closer to 5.5 touchdowns. But again, that's under really, really crap circumstances. As a rookie, we can't lose sight of that either. Terry McLaurin was a rookie last year. Is he going to have a tougher time reaching 10 touchdowns than someone in an offense that's bound to score a lot more points than Washington? Sure. But given his price, the market isn't expecting McLaurin to go bonkers in the touchdown column, despite the fact that there are enough unknowns and enough things that should improve to give us some faith that McLaurin can maintain a 7 or 8 touchdown season. And with a lot of volume, which is also very possible, that means there's certainly a ceiling there. I love Terry McLaurin at his cost this year. But that's going to do it for today's show. Thanks to all of you for listening. If you've yet subscribed to the Late Round Podcast, make sure you are by searching for it pretty much anywhere podcasts can be found. Don't forget to follow me on Twitter @LateRoundQB. And if you could, go to Apple Podcasts and leave a rating and review. It really helps this show. Thanks, everyone. Enjoy your weekend, and I'll talk to you next week.